Because to the extent that the interests of the people of the 22nd Congressional District in Texas are consistent with some broader national legislative objective, great. But to the extent that it's inconsistent, the representative is going to be more interested in representing the views of their constituents, right? That's the point I think that Finno and many of these other people who study Congress would try to get us to understand. So now to go back to the original observation and my conversation with the reporter who said, do you think that Congress is doing a good job? And I said, well, it depends. It depends on whether or not you think the principal job of Congress is to make laws, or do you think that the principal function members of Congress is to represent the interests of their constituents? I'm going to tell you that it probably is doing a good job if we think that the job of Congress is to be a representative institution. Most of the time, they do a great job, at least in the view of their constituents, in representing the interests of their constituents. But maybe that works against the ability of Congress to do the legislative thing. And that's why we think Congress as an institution stinks. We know. We just had an election yesterday, and if you didn't I didn't watch the returns last night. I don't have to watch the returns to have a good idea of what the pundits were likely saying in the discussion of the returns. My guess is that they probably talked ad nauseum about how this election represents how frustrated Americans are with Washington and the establishment in Washington. Well, that is not directed at the individual members of Congress. That's directed at the institution of Congress, right? As well as other institutions, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think it's quite easy when we think about it in those terms. It's easy to understand why we can get, Finno's dilemma consistently manifests in the data year after year, decade after decade for the last 40, almost 50 years. That's a very solid trend that we see in the data. Okay, questions about that before we move on? Again, what I'm really trying to do is set up a more in-depth look at Congress, but I think we really need to understand that this is what's motivating our continued treatment of Congress. So you need to kind of keep this in mind as we go along. Let's talk a little bit about what Congress looks like in recent years. I'm going to go back 3 sessions. The first one that we're going to look at here is the party makeup of the 113th Congress. The 113th Congress is the one that, remember, Congress is on 2-year cycles, right? Okay, so the 113th Congress was the Congress that met from January of 2013 to January of 2015. Okay, and you can see that in that Congress, the Republicans had about 54% of the House seats, and Democrats had 55% of the Senate seats. Okay, they actually technically had 53 seats, but there are 2 independents in Congress or in the Senate. The senator from Maine and Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont are actually independents, but they caucus with the Democrats. So that gave the Democrats 55 votes. Okay. So more on this and on how we might sort of characterize this arrangement here in just a second. In the 114th Congress, that met from it's the current Congress. It met beginning in January of 2015, and it will end its session in January of 2017. Okay, you can see the numbers here in the House of Representatives. Well, in the previous Congress, the Republicans had almost 54% of the seats in the House, and you can see here in the 114th Congress they increased their.
The conference is about to end.
Okay, and the Democrats had a 55% majority in the 113th Congress, and the Republicans took control of the United States Senate, or they got a majority of the seats in the United States Senate as a result of those elections in 2014, with 54% of the seats. Now, how did it come out last night? Who watched the election returns last night? Okay. Did you pay attention to the information that they were giving on Congress, or just the president?
All of it. The Senate was the first one to actually get a majority I think they ended up with like 53 for the Republicans.
Okay.
And then,
Everything pretty much looked like a Republican sweep.
Yeah.
Well, it is true that Republicans are, as a result of the election last night, they are going to retain a majority of the seats in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. But look what happened to their majorities. If we go back to the 114th Congress, they had 56, almost 57% of the House seats. And as a result of the election last night, they lost 6 seats to the Democrats. Okay? I know the media people reported that to you. I mean, it is true. The Republicans will retain their majority, but it'll be a smaller majority in the House. Okay? In the next Congress coming up, that begins in January. Okay? 2017 to 2019. Okay? And in the Senate, look what happened. They had 54% of the seats, and now they have 51% of the seats. So that's a really narrow margin that the Republicans have. Okay? Now, next time, we're going to start with this on Friday out of the gate. We're going to talk about this idea of divided government, which has characterized American politics for quite a long time, over most of the last 50 to 60 years. And so, just before we run out of time here, I want to sort of introduce what we mean by the concept of divided government. Okay? So there are 2 forms of divided government, and we'll elaborate these points on Friday. Okay? The first form of divided government is where the presidency is in the hands of one party, and the other party has a majority of seats in both chambers of Congress. And that would have been consistent in the 114th Congress, the Congress that we're just about to wrap up. Because everybody knows that President Obama is a Democrat, and we just saw, by looking at the screen, we saw that the Republicans had a majority of seats in both the House and the Senate. Okay? The other form of divided government is where one party has a majority of seats in one chamber of Congress, and the other party has a majority of seats in the other chamber of Congress, and that would have been consistent with the 106th Congress. That was a Congress in which George W. Bush was president, so that was when Bill Clinton was president, and the Republicans control, I think it was around 1997, 1998, somewhere around in there, where Clinton was the Democratic president, and one party controlled the House and the other party controlled the Senate. Okay? So that was the 106th Congress. Now, the second form, this form right here, and this is what I want to focus on next time, is more likely to produce what we call gridlock or stalemate in American politics. The frustrations that so many Americans seem to be expressing in last night's election, I'm going to suggest to you, and I think some of my colleagues in political science would suggest to you, that the real problem that we have going on in American government is the problem of divided government, and particularly this form of divided government, where we have one political party controlling the House of Representatives and the other political party controlling the Senate. Okay, so that's where we'll begin on Friday.